Stand at the border between the United States and Canada near the 49th parallel. Look in any direction. There's no wall, no fence, no natural barrier. Just a 20-foot wide cleared strip of forest stretching across mountains, rivers, and plains for nearly 1,400 miles. Trees cut down in a perfectly straight line through wilderness. A geometric abstraction carved into the landscape. This invisible line, agreed upon by diplomats in rooms thousands of miles away, divides two nations, two legal systems, two different stories about what it means to belong. Cross it without permission, and you've committed a crime. But why here? Why this line and not 10 miles north or south? Why does this invisible geometry have the power to determine citizenship, identity, and fate? The world is covered in lines like this. 46,000 miles of international borders crisscross the planet, dividing it into nearly 200 nations. Some follow rivers and mountain ranges. Others slice through deserts in ruler straight lines that ignore all natural features. Still others run through the middle of villages, separating families who've lived side by side for centuries. These borders feel permanent, inevitable, natural. But they're not. Every single one was drawn by human hands, and the story of how that happened reveals something profound about power, empire, geography, and the arbitrary nature of the nation-state itself. This is the origin of borders, the story of how humanity divided the earth. For most of human history, borders as we understand them didn't exist. Our prehistoric ancestors moved across landscapes following game, seasons, and resources. Territorial boundaries were fluid, contested, and constantly shifting. A hunting ground belonged to whoever could defend it. A river valley was home to whoever lived there at the moment. There were no maps, no treaties, no international law. The earth wasn't divided into color-coded blocks like a modern atlas. It was a continuous surface where human groups blended, migrated, fought, and merged. Even as the first civilizations emerged in Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and China, the concept of fixed borders remained alien. Ancient empires didn't have borders in the modern sense. They had frontiers, vague zones of diminishing control where imperial authority faded into wilderness or rival powers. The Roman Empire didn't end at a precise line. It ended wherever Roman legions stopped patrolling, where roads stopped being maintained, where Latin stopped being spoken. The frontier was a gradient, not a boundary. Ancient China built walls, but even the Great Wall wasn't really a border. It was a military fortification, a statement of where civilization believed it ended and barbarism began. But peoples and goods and ideas flowed across it constantly. The wall marked a cultural distinction more than a legal one. Similarly, Hadrian's Wall in Britain separated Roman Britannia from Caledonia, but it was porous, militarized, and constantly contested. Nothing like the clean lines on modern maps. Medieval Europe had no borders at all in the modern sense. Kingdoms were defined not by territory, but by networks of feudal loyalty. A king's realm consisted of wherever his vassals held land and owed him allegiance. These holdings could be scattered, discontinuous, overlapping with other sovereigns' claims. The King of England also ruled parts of France. The Holy Roman Empire was a patchwork of hundreds of semi-independent territories. Borders were fuzzy, personal, and negotiable. What mattered wasn't where you were, but whom you owed loyalty to. The transformation began in Europe during the early modern period, driven by warfare, mapmaking, and a new idea about what kingdoms were. The Treaty of Westphalia in 1648, ending the 30 Years' War, established a revolutionary principle that states were sovereign over defined territories, not people who owed you loyalty, not lands you could tax, but specific, bounded geographical spaces that were exclusively yours. This concept, territorial sovereignty, would reshape the entire world. The invention of modern borders required the invention of modern maps. Before accurate cartography, you couldn't draw precise borders even if you wanted to. Medieval maps were symbolic representations, religious diagrams, not accurate depictions of geography. They showed Jerusalem at the center of the world and dragons at the edges. You couldn't use them to say, "This kingdom ends exactly here." The scientific revolution changed everything. Triangulation surveys, precise astronomical observations, standardized measurements, and printing technology made it possible to create accurate maps. The French began systematic mapping of their kingdom in the 17th century. The British Ordnance Survey, starting in the 18th century, mapped every hill, stream, and property boundary in Britain with unprecedented precision. Suddenly, states could see themselves accurately for the first time. They could measure their territories, calculate distances, and draw exact boundaries. This new cartographic precision transformed how Europeans thought about sovereignty. If you could map your territory precisely, you could define it precisely. Borders became lines on maps that corresponded to lines on the ground. Treaties began specifying boundaries with geometric precision, following the river until the third tributary, then proceeding due north to the mountain pass, then along the watershed to... The language of borders became the language of surveyors and mathematicians. European states began systematically surveying and demarcating their mutual borders. Mountains and rivers were convenient boundaries. They were visible on maps and recognizable on the ground. The Alps became the border between Italian and German-speaking territories. The Rhine separated France from German states. The Pyrenees divided France from Spain. These natural features had always been there, of course, but now they became legally significant, precisely mapped lines of sovereignty. But here's the critical development. As European powers built their empires, they took this new concept of precise borders with them, and they applied it to places where it made absolutely no sense whatsoever. The arbitrary nature of modern borders, the absurdity of straight lines through African deserts, the violence of dividing ancient communities, the chaos of borders that ignore geography, culture, and history. All of this emerged from European imperialism and the colonial project of dividing the world. In 1884, representatives from 14 European nations gathered in Berlin for a conference. Their goal was simple: divide Africa among themselves. Not a single African was present. Not a single representative from the continent being carved up had any say in the proceedings. Over 3 months, European diplomats drew lines on maps of territories most had never visited, creating borders that would determine the fate of hundreds of millions of people. The Scramble for Africa represents the most dramatic example of arbitrary border creation in human history. Before European colonization, Africa had kingdoms, empires, ethnic territories, and trading networks that had evolved over millennia. The Yoruba, the Zulu, the Ashanti, the Somali. These were nations with their own political structures, territories, and identities. The Sahara, the Congo Basin, the Great Rift Valley. These were geographical regions that shaped human settlement and movement. The Europeans ignored all of it. They drew straight lines, literally. Take a map of Africa and look at the borders. The southern border of Libya is almost perfectly straight for over 1,000 miles. The borders of Chad, Niger, Mali, and Mauritania are dominated by straight lines drawn with rulers. These lines don't follow rivers, don't respect mountain ranges, don't correspond to any ethnic or linguistic boundary. They're pure geometry imposed on complex human geography. The Berlin Conference established rules for this division. European powers could claim African territory if they effectively occupied it and notified other European powers. This triggered a frantic race as European nations rushed to plant flags, signed dubious treaties with local leaders who often didn't understand what they were signing, and extend control as quickly as possible. Britain took a vertical strip from Cairo to Cape Town. France took the Western Bulge. Belgium's King Leopold personally claimed the Congo Basin. Germany, Italy, Spain, and Portugal grabbed what they could. The resulting borders were catastrophic. The border between Nigeria and Cameroon split the Bakweri people. The border through Somalia divided nomadic pastoralists from their traditional grazing lands. The border between Kenya and Tanzania split Maasai territory. The border of Gambia is one of the most absurd on earth. A narrow strip following the Gambia River, completely surrounded by Senegal, created because British gunboats could sail up the river. It's literally shaped like a cannon's range. Rwanda and Burundi were given borders that lumped Hutu and Tutsi populations together in ways that exacerbated ethnic tensions, contributing to the genocide that would come a century later. The Congo's borders created a nation larger than Western Europe, with over 200 ethnic groups, making coherent governance nearly impossible. The Sykes-Picot Agreement, though in the Middle East rather than Africa, followed the same logic. British and French diplomats drawing straight lines across maps, creating Iraq, Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon, with borders that ignored centuries of Ottoman administration and the distribution of Sunni, Shia, Kurdish, and Christian communities. The Western Hemisphere tells a different story of arbitrary borders, but one equally revealing. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in the Americas, they found complex civilizations with their own territorial concepts. The Inca Empire stretched along the Andes for thousands of miles. The Aztec Empire controlled central Mexico. Hundreds of other indigenous nations had their own territories, boundaries, and spheres of influence. The Spanish and Portuguese divided South America between them with the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494, literally drawing a line down the Atlantic Ocean, giving everything west to Spain and everything east to Portugal. This is why Brazil speaks Portuguese, while the rest of South America speaks Spanish. Two European kingdoms divided an entire continent they were just beginning to explore based on an imaginary line through the ocean. As Spanish colonial administration developed, they created viceroyalties and administrative divisions based on convenience for colonial government, not indigenous territories. When Latin American nations gained independence in the 19th century, they largely kept these colonial administrative boundaries. The borders between Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina follow lines drawn by Spanish bureaucrats in Madrid, preserving colonial administrative divisions that became national borders. North America developed its own peculiar approach to borders. The United States and Canada have the longest undefended border on Earth, and huge sections of it are straight lines. The 49th parallel was chosen because it was a compromise between American and British territorial claims in the Pacific Northwest. It has no geographical significance whatsoever. It's pure political geometry. The border between the US and Mexico follows the Rio Grande for much of its length, but the western portion is dominated by straight lines drawn after the Mexican-American War. Inside the United States, state borders reveal the same pattern. Look at Colorado or Wyoming. Perfect rectangles. The western states were carved up by Congress before most white Americans had even visited them. Surveyors went out and imposed geometric grids on landscapes they barely understood. The Four Corners, where Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico meet at a single point, is one of the world's only places where four political jurisdictions meet at one location. It's a monument to arbitrary border drawing, four straight lines intersecting in the desert. Australia followed a similar pattern. The internal borders between Australian states are almost entirely straight lines. Latitude and longitude coordinates decided in British colonial offices and imposed on the vast interior. The border between South Australia and Western Australia is a perfectly straight north-south line for over 1,000 miles. It divides nothing meaningful. It's just where British administrators decided one colony ended and another began. Some borders do follow natural features, and these are often held up as examples of natural or inevitable boundaries. The Rhine, the Pyrenees, the Himalayas, the Danube, these geographical features mark major international borders. But this naturalness is largely an illusion. Rivers and mountains don't create borders. Humans create borders and sometimes choose to place them along rivers and mountains because they're convenient markers. Consider rivers. Rivers are actually terrible borders in many ways. They move, they change course, they flood and create new channels. The Rio Grande has shifted numerous times, creating disputes about whether land on one side or the other belongs to the US or Mexico. Rivers are also natural highways, connecting communities on both sides. For most of history, rivers united peoples rather than divided them. The Rhine connected Celtic, Germanic, and Roman peoples long before it became a border. The decision to make it a border was political, not natural. Mountains seem like obvious barriers, but they're not natural borders either. The Alps didn't prevent Italian, French, German, and Slavic peoples from mixing. The Himalayas didn't stop trade and cultural exchange between India and Tibet. The Pyrenees didn't prevent the Kingdom of Navarre from existing on both sides. These mountain ranges became borders because states decided to use them as borders, and they continue to be contested and adjusted. The border between China and India in the Himalayas is still disputed, with both nations claiming different interpretations of where the border runs through the highest mountains on Earth. Even more importantly, natural features don't align with human communities. The Basque people live on both sides of the Pyrenees. Kurdish territory spans the borders of Turkey, Iraq, Iran, and Syria. The Pashtun people straddle the Durand line between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Dividing peoples by natural features often creates more problems than it solves. The naturalness of borders is a comforting myth that obscures the reality of how arbitrary and human-made all borders actually are. The 20th century saw new waves of border creation, particularly with decolonization. As European empires collapsed after World War II, dozens of new nations emerged in Asia and Africa. The question facing these new nations was crucial. What borders would they have? Would they redraw the arbitrary colonial borders? Would they create new nations based on ethnicity, language, or historical kingdoms? With few exceptions, the answer was no. Post-colonial nations kept the colonial borders, no matter how arbitrary. This principle, called utii possidetis, held that colonial administrative boundaries would become international borders. The reasoning was pragmatic. If borders were opened for renegotiation, it could trigger endless conflicts as every ethnic group sought its own nation, as historical kingdoms claimed restoration, as competing visions of natural boundaries clashed. The arbitrary colonial borders were maintained because changing them seemed even more dangerous. The partition of India and Pakistan in 1947 showed the violence that border drawing could unleash. British lawyer Cyril Radcliffe was given 5 weeks to draw a border dividing the subcontinent into Hindu-majority India and Muslim-majority Pakistan. Radcliffe had never been to India before. He drew lines on maps, dividing provinces, splitting communities, and separating peoples who had lived together for centuries. The result was one of the largest migrations in human history, up to 20 million people displaced, and communal violence that killed perhaps 1 million people. The border he drew continues to be one of the most militarized on Earth. Korea was divided at the 38th parallel in 1945 by American officials who literally took about 30 minutes to draw a line on a map, dividing a peninsula that had been unified for centuries. That arbitrary line became one of the most fortified borders on Earth, separating families and creating 2 radically different nations from one people. The same pattern repeated in Vietnam, in Yemen, in Germany. Cold War geopolitics creating or reinforcing borders with little regard for local realities. Today, there are still hundreds of border disputes worldwide. India and China dispute their Himalayan border. Israel and Palestine cannot agree on borders. Morocco and Western Sahara, Serbia and Kosovo, Armenia and Azerbaijan, Russia and Ukraine. The list goes on. Some disputes are about resources, oil, water, minerals. Others are about ethnic nationalism or historical claims. But underlying all of them is the fundamental arbitrariness of borders, and the fact that lines drawn by distant powers rarely align with how local peoples see their territories and identities. Here's the paradox. Borders are almost entirely arbitrary, yet they have become absolutely fundamental to modern political life. The lines drawn in Berlin in 1884, in Versailles in 1919, in Yalta in 1945, in countless treaties and conferences by people who never visited the places they were dividing. These lines now determine citizenship, identity, rights, and opportunities. Being born on one side of a line versus the other can mean the difference between wealth and poverty, war and peace, freedom and oppression. Modern nation-states treat borders as sacred and permanent. Violating another nation's borders is considered an act of war. Yet these borders are recent inventions, historical accidents, the products of imperial ambition, military conquest, colonial administration, and diplomatic compromise. There's nothing natural, inevitable, or permanent about them. Every border could have been drawn differently. Many should have been. Yet borders also serve important functions. They define jurisdictions for law and governance. They create spaces for different political experiments, different cultures, different ways of organizing society. Without borders, we'd have one world government, which brings its own problems of representation, accountability, and diversity. The question isn't whether borders should exist, it's how we understand them, how we maintain them, and how we allow people to cross them. The invention of borders represents one of humanity's most consequential acts of geographical imagination. We took a continuous Earth and divided it into discrete units. We drew lines that didn't exist in nature and made them real through law, force, and collective agreement. We created nations, not by discovering natural divisions, but by imposing arbitrary ones and then convincing ourselves and others that those divisions mattered. Stand again at that border between the United States and Canada, that straight line through the forest. There's nothing there. No natural boundary, no ancient division, no geographical necessity. Just a line that two governments agreed upon, that surveyors marked, that laws enforce, and that shapes the lives of everyone on both sides. It's completely arbitrary. It's also completely real. This is true of every border on Earth. They were drawn by people, often people far from the territories they were dividing, often people with imperial ambitions and limited understanding of local realities. The straight lines through Africa, the divided communities of the Middle East, the geometric states of America, the contested boundaries of Asia, all of them reflect not geographical inevitability, but historical contingency. Different decisions would have created different lines, which would have created different nations, which would have created different histories. We live in a world of borders. Understanding that those borders are human creations, arbitrary and changeable, doesn't make them less powerful. But it does remind us that the way we've divided the Earth is one choice among many possible choices. And if it was chosen once, it could be chosen differently in the future. If this exploration of how we divided the world fascinated you, share this video with someone who'd appreciate understanding the hidden history behind the maps we take for granted. Like this video and subscribe to the Fascinating Origins of Things for more deep dives into the surprising origins of our modern world. What should we explore next? Drop your suggestions in the comments below. Until next time, keep questioning the lines we draw.